This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Early this month, US President Joe Biden caused quite a diplomatic storm when he claimed that one of the reasons that America's economy was growing faster than Japan's was because America was welcoming of immigrants, while Japan was, quote, xenophobic. Unsurprisingly, this didn't go down all that well with Japan, a longtime US ally, who described the comments as unfortunate and inaccurate. Now, to be fair to Biden, the idea that Japan is uniquely migrant skeptic is both popular and not entirely incorrect. Historically, Japan has had an immigration rate far lower than that of most Western countries, and this definitely hasn't helped them solve either their decades-long economic stagnation or the accompanying demographic crisis. Nonetheless, in the past few years or so, things have changed, and while Japanese politicians strenuously avoid using the word immigration, Japan has quietly become significantly more pro-immigrant than stereotypes would suggest. So in this video, we're going to have a look at how Japan's immigration policy has changed recently, the reasons behind the shift, and whether this change of heart could actually solve either Japan's economic or demographic woes. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start with a bit of history. In large part because both the Japanese government and public conceive of Japan as an ethnically homogenous nation-state, Japan has long had some of the most restrictive immigration rules in the world, especially when it comes to obtaining permanent residency or citizenship. Until very recently, Japan's total foreign population represented less than 2% of the entire population, and most of these were either what's known as Nikkei-jin, ethnic Japanese immigrants from South America, usually Brazil, or Zainichi, people of Korean descent who were mostly born in Japan and only speak Japanese but who have Korean passports, because Japan doesn't have birthright citizenship and the naturalization process is costly and difficult. For context, that's about half the global average of 3.5%, way less than the OECD average of about 7%, and miles below European countries like Germany, who today have a foreign population representing nearly 25% of the total. Japan also admits conspicuously few refugees, and the fraction of asylum seekers recognised as refugees in any year is usually less than 1%. In 2019, for instance, Japan admitted just 44 refugees, 0.4% of all applications. For context, that same year, the United States accepted nearly 45,000 refugees, with a recognition rate of 30%, and Germany accepted nearly 55,000 refugees, with a recognition rate of 26%. Obviously, this policy has come under pressure recently thanks to Japan's demographic crisis. But even before that, when Japan's economy was booming in the 80s, Japanese business leaders lobbied the government for more foreign labour to fill labour shortages, especially in so-called 3K jobs, which are basically low-paid, rough jobs that most Japanese consider beneath them. While Japan had, and still has, a relatively welcoming system for short-term skilled labour migrants like university professors, the government was reluctant to accept significant numbers of unskilled labourers, in part because they were wary of what happened in Europe after World War II, when guest workers intended to fill post-war labour shortages ended up staying permanently. Anyway, despite loosening its immigration laws slightly in the 90s, via an amendment to the Immigration Control Act in 1990 and the introduction of the so-called Technical Intern Training Program in 1993, the raw numbers didn't change that much, and the share of foreign workers in the total labour force never went above 3%. On top of that, the Technical Intern Training Program became a point of controversy internationally. Temporary workers were treated terribly, and the US State Department warned in 2016 that it could be considered a form of human trafficking. This lack of intern protections was in part because the Japanese government didn't want the guest workers to stay, and 97% of them left after their visa expired. However, in the past few years, Japan's demographic crisis has begun to bite, and the government has responded by quietly liberalising its immigration rules. Japan's fertility rate, that is, the average number of children per woman, fell below the replacement rate of 2.1 in the 70s, and has steadily dropped to about 1.2 today, despite some very generous pro-family policies. Japan's labour force duly began shrinking in the 90s, and in the 2000s, Japan's population as a whole began shrinking. Japan was able to temporarily offset its labour shortages by bringing women into the workforce, but this was always only a stopgap, and in 2022, the labour force started shrinking again. This has become a serious problem for the Japanese economy. Japan's unemployment rate has been below 3% for the best part of a decade now, and 86% of Japanese firms report having difficulty filling jobs. As the problem has become more acute, Japan's government has quietly and gradually liberalised its labour migration policy. In the 2000s, the technical intern training programme was expanded to include more industries, and the maximum stay was extended from 3 to 5 years. However, the big change happened in 2019, when the Japanese government quietly created a new visa for specified skilled workers, known as the SSW1 visa. Originally, this permitted foreign nationals who had completed technical intern training to stay in Japan for a maximum of 5 years to work in any of 12 designated sectors, which were chosen by the government as those fields with the worst labour shortages. Japan's foreign population quickly rose from about 2 million in the mid-2010s to nearly 3 million before the pandemic. Then, last year, as many of the original SSW1 visas were expiring, Japanese businesses complained to the government that they wouldn't be able to replace the workers. So, the government introduced a new SSW2 visa for the most in-demand SSW1 workers. Importantly, SSW2 workers can bring their families to Japan, and it can be renewed any number of times, i.e. SSW2 workers can stay in Japan permanently. Originally, SSW2 was limited to workers in the construction and shipbuilding sectors, but in June the government agreed to extend it to 9 other sectors, including the hard-to-define service sector, and then doubled its annual visa cap to 160,000. This is the first time that Japan has allowed permanent residency for workers, and it finally opens the door to immigration on a broader scale. Now, this has all been done very quietly, and Japanese officials basically never use the word immigration, instead preferring to talk exclusively about labour. This is presumably because they're worried about a public backlash, but interestingly, polling suggests that their anxieties might be unfounded. Most Japanese people are very aware of their demographic issues, and have therefore become more pro-immigrant. While international comparisons are complicated by Japan's limited experience with migration, polling suggests that Japanese people are now some of the most pro-migrant in the entire world. And a poll from late last year found that 86% of Japanese municipalities want more foreign workers. The big question now is whether this is all too late. Japan's demographic crisis is already pretty terrible, and thanks to a weak yen and decades of economic stagnation, Japan isn't as attractive a destination for immigrants as it once was. Ultimately, underpinning this topic is a lot of data, whether that's economics, trade patterns, polling, or demographics. A lot of the time in politics, you just have to understand the data. So if you want to get a better grasp on these things, I'd recommend Brilliant. They've just introduced a whole bunch of new data courses, which are perfect for learners of any level, taking you through everything from Bayes' theorem to multiple linear regression. It even uses real datasets from the likes of Starbucks, X, and Spotify to bring things to life. I'm not even a super mathematical person, and I still found it easy and enjoyable to work through. That's because of how Brilliant is designed, built around learning by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and AI. The thing is that, like I said, you can learn all of these things quickly and easily, because Brilliant's courses are split into easy-to-digest chunks. Brilliant helps you build real knowledge in minutes a day, with fun lessons you can do whenever you have time, replacing mindless scrolling on the train or waiting for coffee with something actually stimulating and rewarding. So get learning across all kinds of STEM subjects for free for a full 30 days by clicking the link in the description. That way you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription, and they'll know that you came from us, which really helps us out.